that's affected the West and the world at the moment. And critical race theory is the idea that there is systemic racism within white people, and it's a way of deconstructing Western civilization. It's a neo-Marxist ideology developed from the Frankfurt School. When the Berlin Wall came down, the communists felt that they'd lost, but they didn't give up. They went into the universities of the West, and they went underground in the universities of the West, and they decided that the way to bring the West down was to use either gender or race as a way of deconstructing Western civilization. And so they developed critical race theory as part of their strategy to bring down Western capitalism and Christendom. If you don't believe me, a few months ago, if you'd gone on Black Lives Matter website, it was very clear on the statements that they were undermining the Christian view of the family, and that they had a very liberal view of what society was. Because of the criticisms that they were neo-Marxist, they went and hid some of their agenda on their website. So the church shouldn't be involved in critical race theory. The Southern Baptists have played about with it. The Southern Baptist Theological Seminary have been infiltrated. Some of their lecturers have been infiltrated by critical race theory. A lot of theologians and pastors are playing around with critical race theory. But at the end of the day, the Word of God is above any sociological or political ideology. These are just philosophies of men. They're just ideologies. And we don't root our Bible teaching, our theology, on the ideologies of men. We root it upon the Word of God. And the Word of God, it says in John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son." The Bible doesn't see color. It doesn't see color. And any Christian who is a Christian does not see color. You know, I'm married to Dorcas. She's from Ghana. She's black, but I don't see black. I just see Dorcas. She just sees Jason. Critical race theory causes division within the church and division within society. One of the ways to uproot a nation and to uproot a culture is to destroy its history. So one of the things about critical race theory is it's a neo-Marxist ploy to destroy our history, so that we go back to our history with hypercritical eyes, where we demolish anything that seems to be about slavery, not taking into consideration that that's part of the historical time frame, that you have to judge history within its context and the way people were then, not from our point of view. And so we go to history with these hypercritical glasses and uproot monuments and uproot institutions and say that they're institutional racist because their founders were into slavery and things, not recognizing the good and the bad. And in every society there is good and bad. Even amongst critical race theorists there is good and bad, you know. And to take a more mature attitude towards history, not this neo-colonialist bashing of Western civilization and Christendom, but to take a more balanced view. So for example, when the colonialists came to Africa, there was horrendous exploitation. Just look at the King of Belgium, what he did in Congo. It was terrible, no doubt about it. But the colonialists also brought roads, they brought education, they brought hospitals, they brought a lot of good things. They brought Christianity. So we have to look at history in a very mature, balanced way, seeing the negatives and the positives. It's not all black and white. It's not all black, 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 as it were. These are evil, wicked, vile people. There was good and there was bad. And so we look at history in a more nuanced, a more richer, and a more cultured way. Whereas this critical race theory is like a bludgeon hammer at history and smashing down everything that it says is about slavery and destroying our institutions and destroying our monuments and getting people to bow the knee But actually, it's a very subtle uh, tool of Marxist ideology where they are destroying Western values and Western civilization and bringing in revolutions within Western nations. And for the English football team to be bowing the knee, for the FA to be promoting it, for it to be promoted by the media, the politicians in the West, really, it's extremely irresponsible. It's only uh, uh, placating a small minority of people who were virulent and boisterous, and it has done, and it's gonna do more and more damage to the West. And the church needs to keep far away from critical race theory. It needs to keep far, far away. Any theologian, pastor, theological seminary, you have to keep far, far away from it. You are dancing with the devil. You don't know what you're saying. Well, how do you know? You're just a kind of Bible thumping. No, I've read the Derrida. I've read the Foucault. I've read your Marxism. I've read your Kant. I've read your sociologist and all the rest of it, and psychologist and whatever. Yeah, I've read these things in the past. Yeah, so I can get highly nuanced. I can give you the Raku and all this Raku's hermeneutics and all this stuff and Gadamer and all the rest. I can do all the dance of that if I want to, but it's dangerous stuff because at the end of the day, we just need the pure word of God. We need to lift up Christ. We need to preach the gospel. We need to reach out to the needy. And we don't need to be getting bogged down with critical race theory because it is a ploy of the Marxists to destroy Western civilization. Because once you destroy the history, you've destroyed the people. And this neo-critical race theory, it destroys the internal structure of a nation because the narrative of a nation is broken down. But you see, the history of America was evil. The history of Britain was evil. The history of Holland was evil. And it internally breaks down your nation. And pulling down the monuments and pulling down pictures in institutions. It's a neo-Marxist revolution. We're seeing, whether you like it or not, communism. There is a certain thing going around. I won't mention it because there's a lot of censorship going on now. But there's a certain disease going around that came from a certain communist country, say no more. And it's part of a revival of communism. That's what we're seeing. Certain big tech companies are in bed with the communists and involved in massive, huge censorship. And so critical race theory is part of this ongoing censorship, this ongoing communist revolution that's happening in the West. And we as the church, we need to realize that that's what's happening. And we need to stand back, and we need to make sure that we're grounded in the Word of God. We need to make sure that we're preaching the gospel. And we need to make sure that we're doing the work of an evangelist. In fact, I'm going to show you something. Just wait there. I'm just reading this book this afternoon. I'm just reading this book, and it's John and Betty Stam, and they were missionaries in China, and they went to China and they were dragged through the streets naked and beaten by the communists. Well, hello, history's repeating itself, folks. The West is turning communism, believe it or not. The big tech companies, they're censoring. Critical race theory is produced by neo-Marxists who incidentally contradict themselves, who have big mansions and have been found out to be millionaires. So it's a bit contradictory, isn't it? But never mind, we'll put that aside. But critical race theory is communist, and it's part of a rise of communism in America, a rise of communism in Britain, a rise of communism in the West. And it's because the West has left its Christian roots. There's a vacuum now, and it's being filled by totalitarianism. And that's what we're seeing, totalitarianism on the rise in the West. But for us, we have to keep focused like John and Betty Stam. They were rooted in the Word of God. They were rooted in the Word, and they preached the Word of God. They preached the gospel, and they gave their lives for the gospel. And that's what we need to be doing in this age. We need to be very careful as theologians, as pastors, as theological seminaries, missionary societies, churches, that we don't get sucked into this critical race theory stuff, that we don't see color. We tell people we don't see color. I'm married to a Ghanaian. She's black, but I don't see black. She's just my wife. She doesn't see white. I'm just her husband. And critical race theory makes you see black. That person's black, that person's white. It causes division within society. It causes revolution. It's basically a revolutionary tool, because the next step of the critical race theory mob is at some point the communists will cause a kind of violent uprising within America and UK and the West. There'll be this violence uprising, either by BLM or some other Marxist groups, Antifa. They'll be using guns and they'll be shooting, and then the governments will say, "Oh, we've got to stop all this violence. We need more powers. We need the army on the streets." And it's just a ploy of the communists to take full control. And these professors and students, the neo-Marxists call them useful idiots. You're a useful idiot to them, because once they've trained you in their agenda, their critical race theory, once they get you out on the streets doing the BLM, Antifa stuff, and rioting and all the rest of it, once they take power, you're next gone. They take you down. Whether you're the professor, whether you're the student, you're just taken down. You're just cut down. Because the name of the game is ultimately to take power. It's happened in Yugoslavia. They didn't do race baiting there, but they pitted the Christians and the Muslims together. They put on the TV all this struggle between the Christians and the Muslims and violence, and it went on for a couple of years, violence and violence. And in the end, the communists said, "Look, we need to take over. We need to take over because there's all this violence and stuff." And people said, "Yeah, you take over." So this is what the communists want in America. That's what they want in Britain, in Holland, and they're winning. They are winning. The people, they've used a certain disease that came from a certain communist country. They're using that as part of the ploy to take over. They're using critical race theory as their battering ram to come into the education system. And because the Western nations are weak, they're not strong in the Christian faith, they're not strong in Christianity, there's little resistance. There's little resistance. And those who are liberals, who are post-Enlightenment thinkers, academics, they're all in on it. They're accepting it. They're not resisting. The judges are not resisting. The politicians are not resisting. And it's a flood that's come in. And we as a church, we as the people of God, we have to remember that at the end of the day, all this critical race theory and all this revival of communism is going to end up like this. These two were missionaries to China, and the Chinese communists took these people and dragged them through the streets naked and killed them. And that's what will happen to us. That's the end game of big tech. That's the end game of this critical race theory. This is the end game of communism. This is the end game of this certain disease that came from a certain communist place. That's the end game. So let's not be taken in by critical race theory and allowing it to cause division in our churches, in our seminaries, in our pastorships. Let's stay away from it, and let's just get back to being missionaries like John and Betty Stam, preaching the gospel, lifting up the gospel, and that's what we need to do, and not get sidetracked. And the Southern Baptist, sad to say, you need to move away from this critical race theory. And the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary has been taken over by some theologians in the seminary, and it doesn't bode well. In fact, they've been very, very harsh towards seminary professors who've actually spoken out against critical race theory, who have actually lost their jobs at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. So this is a very serious and dangerous thing that's seeping into Christian churches and theologians and pastors. This is not something that is on the periphery of the church. It's actually an acid that's coming. If it's coming to the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, where you have a couple of theologians there pumping out this stuff within the seminary, and Al Mohler, who I've always respected, actually accepting this stuff, not challenging this stuff, and Al Mohler actually creating a silence clause to professors who've left, that they're not allowed to speak about the college. It shows you that even within the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary and the Southern Baptist movement in America, they've been infiltrated by critical race theory, and nobody's saying anything about it, which is a huge issue for evangelicalism, for the charismatic movement, for the Pentecostal charismatic movement, for the evangelical movement, for the Reform movement. It's a huge issue. If it's coming to Southern Baptist Theological Seminary and the Southern Baptist churches at the councils, then this is huge. It's only going to get worse in the mainline denominations and in evangelicalism. And we need to put a line in the sand and say, no, we're not having critical race theory. It's neo-Marxist. We know what your game is, causing revolution and division within society, and we're not having it, period. So join the defense of the faith and stay away from this stuff. Learn about it so you can critique it. But remember, this is a revolutionary tool to bring the final throes of Christendom to its knees. But you know what? God is sovereign, and who